The slaughter in Iraq is still going on, and the question is, if the president had acted more forcefully earlier, could he have stopped it? Well, some of the Kurds, with our Chris Mitchell, believe the answer is yes, we could have stopped it.
The United States is helping the Kurds now, but the Islamic terrorists are still on the march. We have 2 reports from CBN News, starting with Chris in Kurdistan.
After ISIS defeated the Peshmerga in a couple of battles, some wondered if the Kurdish military was up to the challenge. This is the front lines of the war between ISIS and the Peshmerga. Last night there was a 2-hour battle here. ISIS came with a large convoy and heavy artillery, but this time the Peshmerga prevailed. Signs of the battle litter the town. This destroyed vehicle lobbed shells at the Peshmerga. Across the road, ISIS left behind this dead fighter. The victory at Makmur encouraged the Peshmerga, but they still face an enemy with a robust arsenal, much of it captured Iraqi equipment supplied by the U.S.
Unfortunately, we have been outgunned by their access to resources because they are a rich terrorist group. We need heavy weaponry, armor, ammunition, because they have access to massive amounts of resources like bulletproof vehicles, heavy weaponry, armor, which we lack.
Peshmerga commanders say because ISIS has heavy weapons, they can keep their distance. They say if they had the same kind of weapons, it would be a different war. One thing is clear, U.S. airstrikes have made a difference on the battlefield and in the diplomatic arena.
Of course, it's good for us. When a superpower like the United States intervenes, the balance of power goes in our favor. But also, it's very important for us that it's the first time recently that the U.S. has intervened and said, I am going to protect my ally.
But Peshmerga commanders told CBN News they need more help.
The weapons that we have, ISIS has the same stuff, but even better ones. We need heavy weaponry, artillery, and Humvees. These are all very important to us.
One senior Kurdish official said if the Peshmerga had been better armed, much of the current crisis and potential genocide might have been avoided. Commanders in the field say if they have the weapons, they're more than up to the task.
The Peshmerga are fighting for the sake of their land, their people, and their rights. So they are encouraged, and they are ready to confront the enemy wherever they are.
Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Makmur, Kurdistan.
This is Gary Lane reporting. President Obama interrupted his vacation on Martha's Vineyard to detail U.S. and coalition efforts to help the Iraqi people. So far, humanitarian airdrops have provided 16,000 gallons of water and 75,000 meals for Yazidis and other Kurds on the run from the Islamic State militants. At least 15 targeted U.S. airstrikes have made a difference in halting their advance towards the Kurdish capital of Erbil. But the president again said the current crisis must be resolved by the Iraqis, not the Americans.
The only lasting solution is for Iraqis to come together and form an inclusive government, one that represents the legitimate interests of all Iraqis, and one that can unify the country's fight against ISIL.
On Monday, Iraq's president nominated the deputy speaker of the parliament, Haider al-Abadi, to be the country's new prime minister. He's favored by the United States and viewed as someone who would bring unity to the country in its battle against the Islamic State militants. He will now have 30 days to form a new government, but his task won't be easy. Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki and members of his political party oppose Abadi's nomination, calling it unconstitutional. That power struggle comes as many Iraqis say al-Maliki has divided Iraq by favoring his Shiite cronies and excluding the Sunnis and Kurds from more than $100 billion in annual oil profits.
The United States stands ready to support a government that addresses the needs and grievances of all Iraqi people. We're also ready to work with other countries in the region to deal with the humanitarian crises and counterterrorism challenge in Iraq. Mobilizing that support will be easier once this new government is in place.
Perhaps more difficult will be the development of a long-term strategy to counter the strengthening and advance of the Islamic State fighters throughout the Levant region. The region includes parts of southern Turkey, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and Egypt. Gary Lane, CBN News.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, here is the scene. ISIS is formed in Syria, our president did nothing. More recently, just the last day or two, Hillary Clinton, former Secretary of State, has criticized the Obama administration for the fact that they did not find the moderate rebels against the Assad regime in Syria and help them. And basically her contention was that if they had done something for them, then this ISIS might not have been formed. But ISIS brought together the elements fighting against the Assad regime in Syria and has morphed out of that into Iraq. I want to show you something that the prophet Amos said. I think it's very telling right now, just these words from the Bible. Listen to this. You put off the day of disaster and bring near the reign of terror. You put off the day of disaster and bring near the reign of terror. Now, on the other hand, coming to Iraq, Obama says, well, first of all, before we do anything, we've got to have a government in place. Well, this is absurd. The Shias and the Sunnis are at odds with one another. The poor people of the Kurds are at the tail end of all of that. And Maliki has been a divider of massive proportion, and the country is in chaos. So what Obama is saying, I'm not going to do anything until you form a government, and ISIS is moving at breakneck speed to conquer a great segment of the population, and there's a humanitarian disaster. That's what inaction causes. Now, I want to show you two maps. The first map has to do with how far ISIS has gone. Now, Mr. Director, if you have that, there it is. All right. You see, it's a big hunk of Syria, a big hunk of Iraq. They're surrounding Baghdad, and they're moving on Erbil up there in the Kurdistan area. And in the Sunni heartland, they have dominance, and they just rolled over that in a matter of a few days. Now, they talk about, we don't want that only, we want the so-called Levant. Now, let's take a look at the map and see where that is. That's Syria, that's Jordan, that's Israel. It is part of Egypt, and ultimately it would include Iraq and Baghdad and very possibly Iran. So they want the caliphate over that entire region, and that's what they're talking about. The Levant is the part in green. Now, that's what they're asking for, and they are brutal killers, and they are well armed. Now, a long time ago, I said we should have supported the Kurds. They're wonderful people. They have a democratic-type government in place in their part of the region, and the Peshmerga are strong fighters. But we withheld any aid from them, saying, well, we've got to only give this through the central government in Baghdad, which is Maliki's government. Finally, we've said, this is nonsense, we've got to do something, and it's too little, too late. And this is going to be the story we're going to hear over and over and over again. And let's pray. We were praying yesterday, we were still praying, but I am very grateful that at least we're doing something, and that we're finally waking up to the fact that Iraq is going to wind up in three parts. It's going to be a Shia country, it's going to be a Sunni country, and it's going to be a Kurd country. And whether Obama and Kerry like it or not, Iraq, as it currently exists, through that Sykes-Picot agreement, is breaking apart, and it's not going to come back together again. So we need to find out the part we can help, and the part has to be the Kurdish nation. And there they have a nice oil supply in Kirkuk, but they need to come in and take back that dam in Mosul, which is very important, and they need to alleviate the plight of the Christians, and they will if we give them enough arms. So, Terry, you put off the day and brought forth a reign of terror, and that's what we've got.
Well, we talked yesterday about the need for believers to pray, and we're going to talk more today about hope. We have hope that even late, things can be done.
There's always hope. And ladies and gentlemen, one more time, I want to tell you about a book about Islam. We have about 180,000 people that have received this. It doesn't necessarily address this specific conflict, but it tells you about the whole thing of what Islam is doing around the world and what they believe, what these Islamists believe. And later on, we're going to be talking to a gentleman who's got a take on the way that Islam is being favored in the United States these days, and it's a difficult problem. Well, here at home, a man who was once considered a possible presidential contender is now on trial. Former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife face charges of political corruption in a federal court in Richmond, Virginia. Our Jennifer Wishon brings us that story.
This is the daily scene outside the federal courthouse in Richmond. Former Governor Bob McDonnell and his wife Maureen arriving separately, escorted by their respective teams of attorneys into a courtroom where dirty laundry about their marriage, family, and personal finances is aired.
I think the more the truth comes out, the better it is for me, and that's all we want in this case is the truth.
The McDonnells are charged with accepting more than $165,000 in gifts, vacations, and personal loans from Johnny Williams, a former business executive, in exchange for promoting his products. The defense claims at the time in question, the McDonnells' marriage was broken and that the couple barely spoke, making it hard for them to engage in a criminal conspiracy. Maureen's attorney also suggests Williams took advantage of her strained marriage. Others have testified Maureen had a crush on Williams.
What do you say to your friends and family, supporters?
Just I love them.
So far, Maureen has taken the most heat, her former chief of staff calling her a nutbag. And it's likely taking a toll on the entire family. One of the couple's daughters, Kaylin, got emotional when she was called to testify regarding Williams footing the bill for catering at her wedding. The former governor is expected to take the stand in his own defense. Until then, he's not saying much, but he's always been outspoken about the importance of his Christian faith.
As I mentioned, I have great faith in God and in the justice system, and that sustains me every day.
The major question remains, did McDonnell actually break the law? Jennifer Wishon, CBN News.
Well, I want to make one thing clear, ladies and gentlemen, that we have a law in Virginia, and it is very easy law in terms of politicians. There is no law against a politician receiving a gift. There's no limit on campaign contributions given to politicians, and certain of those things are actually beyond the reach of the government. So in terms of getting gifts, there's no state law that has been broken. Well, I want to get into this detail because Bob McDonnell is a Christian. He happens to be a graduate of Regent University, and he is a personal dear friend of mine. We've seen his career from the time that he was a young lawyer, that he went to the General Assembly, and then he became Attorney General, and then governor. He's been a distinguished governor and a distinguished Attorney General. And this whole thing is a grief and a shock to me. Well, Jay Sekulow is here from the American Center for Law and Justice. And Jay, what is the case? What is the feds trying to do with this a hugely expensive legal proceeding?
It looks like it's going to be a 6-week trial, Pat. Now, you said it correct, and that is under the law, under Virginia law, none of this would be an issue because there's no limitation on gifts, there's no limitation on campaign contributions, for good or for ill, for those of us that are giving them. You know how that works.
Pretty good government here in Virginia.
But that's the way that it works in Virginia. So what happened was the federal government came in with this indictment alleging that Bob received these gifts, and therefore, of course, he had to be giving something back to this company that was, and this individual that was giving him gifts. Now, two things. Number one, it's, in corruption cases, it's the old quid pro quo. I get something and I give you something in return. Well, the problem is here is Bob got some gifts from the guy. He didn't give him anything in return. He didn't set up special state appointments. He didn't give him statewide grants. Nothing. So far, the government, as the trials progress, has not been able to establish the quo part of the quid pro quo. So what did Bob do for this that would be inappropriate? Other than you're the governor of Virginia, so of course you're going to promote a Virginia company.
Well, he had a luncheon to show investors or something in the company, but governors do that all the time.
Pat, I mean, 5 former attorneys general from Virginia, from our Commonwealth, right here, 5 Republican and Democrats said what Bob McDonnell did is not a violation of the law. Period. And this was bipartisan.
But the judge, they wanted to come in with an amicus, and the judge refused to let them. Why?
Yeah, the judge, well, you know, it's judicial discretion. He denied all amici from every side in the case. I think the amicus was enlightening. I'll tell you why it was enlightening. It was enlightening because you had 5 attorney generals, Republicans and Democrats, saying this isn't these aspect of the case, the corruption charge, is not valid. Now, Bob hasn't even begun to really mount his defense yet. And I think what you're going to see is, first of all, Johnny Williams, the person that's the lead witness for the government, did not do a good job, in my view, on examination, or certainly on cross-examination. And he has been given immunity. So, you know, what everybody needs to remember is the guy that's testifying against Bob has been given immunity from securities fraud charges that they were investigating and tax charges. So he gets, his deal is, you talk about Bob, you deal with Bob, you testify against Bob McDonnell, and we're going to go ahead and not try you for these other cases.
Well, that
comes out.
Everything he says is suspect then, isn't it?
Of course, and the jury's thinking, the motive, what's the motive for the guy that's the main witness against us? And here, the main witness against Bob McDonnell's motive is to testify to help the government. Why? So he doesn't get prosecuted. So, you know, it's a troubling and tragic situation. I think it is a government overreach. You remember in cases, in the Edwards case, they tried it and went to a jury. He was acquitted. They don't have a tape or a piece of evidence where Bob said, if you do this, I will do that, which is normally how a corruption case would be made. So this was really a stretch by the federal government. I think it was completely political. And at the end of the day, it's a political witch hunt. Unfortunately, it's taking place in a federal court.
Bob was, we mentioned candidate for president, but he certainly was a candidate for vice president.
Absolutely.
Without question. And he would have been on the short list of Mitt Romney for vice president. Eric Holder is the guy that's
the Attorney General.
He's behind all this stuff.
Sure, because he as the chief, the Attorney General, could make the decision. This is, if he were to look at the facts objectively and say, this is a political prosecution, we don't do that. But you know, this isn't the first time the Department of Justice has done this under Eric Holder. This kind of federal overreach, it seems to be typical of what this administration does. They overreach, they get caught, and they pull back a little bit, but they still picked up a little bit of territory. And in Bob's case, they really overreached, and it's a criminal case involved. And Bob's going to put on a vigorous defense. His lawyers will put on a vigorous defense. And at the end of the day, the jury is going to make this decision.
What is their defense? Is going to be no quo?
No quo. I mean, that Bob did nothing out of the ordinary of what any governor would do in any state in promoting Virginia Corporation.
I met with him, and he was devastated, you know, a few months ago. And I said, Bob, you've done nothing wrong. And to my knowledge, nothing wrong.
Well, you know, if you can get indicted for accepting a gift, it'd be one thing. But you can't get indicted for accepting a gift because it's not illegal. So, you know, they're building up what I call a perception case. You know, they have a picture with him in a car, and they say he was driving this guy's car. Is that a crime? I mean, you know, is that an illegal act under federal law? Do we indict someone for that?
If your wife goes with somebody to New York on a shopping spree, you don't get indicted for that either.
But this is their whole, you know, Pat, if you look at the whole case, this is the whole case. The whole case is he played golf at this guy's country club. I mean, these are not crimes. In fact, the way the government's interpreting it, governors could not govern. Because they would just be at that point, it'd be like appointing them an executive director. They would not be able to govern. So a lot of lawyers, not just me, but a lot of lawyers that do criminal law and do criminal law have looked at this and said, no, not an illegal act.
Well, look at the Lincoln bedroom. I mean, the Clintons were selling favors like it was going out of style. And then they have their daughter. You need some...
You're a good man.
I haven't used it yet. I'm sorry. But this is unusual, too, that they would link the First Lady with the governor because she had no favors to give.
And she wasn't an official.
No.
So she's not a government official, and they're basically painting a case where she is. And sorry about my voice. The fact is, Pat, if you look at the case and you look at the indictment, at the end of the day, the indictment doesn't really allege a crime. But they're still going after him.
Well, there's one little gimmick, and we should point out. Bob asked for a bank loan to support a real estate project.
Right.
And when he filled out his financial reform, he did not list the loans of $50,000 that this Johnny Williams had made available to him. Now, those loans were non-recourse, which means that they are not enforceable against him.
Non-recourse, which means they don't affect his ability to repay.
Exactly.
Which means it doesn't affect the creditworthiness of the individual. So if you were looking at it from an underwriting standpoint, it's a non-recourse loan. He doesn't have a personal obligation. He may have a moral obligation to be like he wants to pay it.
There's no note that says you are liable for this debt. And I think that's going to come out through expert witnesses.
Well, this is the only thing that they've got that has any substance.
Well, they always stick, you know, Pat, in all these, they always stick in the provision where it's called the gotcha provision.
Yeah.
But again, this is like the quid pro quo. It's a non-recourse debt. He also amended his financial applications. So I think that's going to be hard. It would be such a ridiculous way for this to go. You put the guy through this entire process, and you're arguing about a $50,000 non-recourse loan?
And they're going to try to get her on obstruction of justice because she didn't give her. I mean, there's always.
Yeah, but you know, but she's not. Here's the thing with her. Maureen McDonnell was the first lady. Was the first lady of Virginia. She was not a government official.
Yeah.
So if she bought something or sold something or engaged in a business, she's a private citizen. So what they've done is they're painting with this very broad brush of saying, we don't like the way this looks. Here was a guy that was on the short list for vice president. Well, could have been a presidential contender.
Yeah.
We don't like the way it looks. So let's indict him. If it sticks, it sticks. If it doesn't, it doesn't. But that's not the way the justice system's supposed to work. Well, so what you have, and this is the real tragedy of this, this is going to be a 6-week trial. Yes. It's expensive for Bob and Maureen. It's expensive for the United States. And what's going to be the end result? They're going to be talking about a $50,000 non-recourse debt. That's going to be the end of this trial? That would be pathetic.
Well, it'll be pathetic, but that's what the feds do. And Jay, it breaks my heart. You know, I've seen you're working on Lois Lerner, and I've seen the stuff that she did with the FEC, and what she's doing with the IRS is outrageous.
And not one single criminal charge brought against Lois Lerner, who obviously, knowingly, willfully got rid of evidence.
Yes.
Or it was mysteriously evaporated into outer space.
Well, they need a special prosecutor, and Eric Holder is responsible.
And he's not going to do it.
He's not going to appoint
He's not going to do it. So they're going to ask this question. Why are they spending the resources to go after Bob McDonnell and Maureen and not go after not just Lois Lerner, all these people that were involved in this scam at the IRS?
Yeah.
And they're getting away with it. No one's doing anything. I mean, if it wasn't for our civil litigation and what Congress is doing in oversight, nothing would be happening.
She was saying manufacture a case against the Tea Party type so we can...
A criminal case.
A criminal case.
So, again, here's the Department of Justice. The same Department of Justice that's going after Bob McDonnell wanted to, quote, piece together criminal cases against our clients with no evidence. But they thought if they could just do one, it would send a chilling effect. And that email, by the way, we do have.
This is the land of the free, the home of the brave, the greatest democracy on earth. These people have distorted. This is much worse than Watergate. I heard somebody talking about Watergate that was so bad, but it was professionals going after professionals.
Right.
I mean, it was professional burglars going after the professionals with the Democratic Party. These is the government going after ordinary citizens.
Yes, who don't generally have the resources to fight back. I mean, what this economically does to Bob and Maureen McDonnell is devastating because you had a 6-week trial with major law firms. You're talking serious costs. Our clients, if we weren't representing them and they had to pay for this, it'd be millions that we probably have spent. I think we calculated the other day, Pat, on the IRS cases so far. Probably, if you were just bill it out on time, probably $3.5–4 million. I mean, it's been that extensive. And in Bob's case, I mean, this is a trial that's going to go on for 6 weeks with months of prep. And at the end of the day, if it comes down to that the charge the jury's really debating is whether a $50,000 non-recourse loan is subject to federal liability, that is what the federal government went after him for. I would say, again, pathetic. But at the end of the day, he's going to put on a vigorous defense. You pray and hope the justice system works, and we're certainly going to pray for Bob.
One more reason why this administration is just destroying this nation and is destroying its own credibility. Well, Jay, I appreciate you being here.
Thanks for the tea, Pat.
I'm glad you got it. I hadn't drunk any of it, so I'm glad. All right. There's something in the air around here.
It must be.
It happens to me from time to time, too.
It did me.
Well, God bless you. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks.
The country is mourning the death of actor and comedic genius Robin Williams after he died in an apparent suicide Monday at age 63. Williams had a long career in Hollywood, starting in the 1970s as an alien on the TV comedy Mork and Mindy. He played both comedic and dramatic roles in films and eventually won an Oscar. But in his personal life, Williams struggled with depression and addiction, and he talked openly about it over the years. Just last month, he announced he was returning to a 12-step program for treatment. A Spanish missionary priest being treated for Ebola died in Madrid today. The hospital would not confirm that he was being treated with the experimental drug for Ebola that was given to the 2 American medical missionaries. But his order and the Spanish health ministry said he would be. His body will now be cremated to avoid public health risks. Remember, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website, cbnnews.com.